Cruise ships are meant to be places of joy, luxury, and escape. But what if I told you that behind the music, the laughter, and the ocean breeze, something much darker is waiting? These stories aren't fiction. They come from real encounters, rechecked from forums like Reddit and personal accounts, verified, chilling, and unforgettable. Tonight, you'll hear 5 of the most disturbing cruise ship horror stories ever told, each one pulling you deeper into the shadows of the sea. So dim the lights, grab your headphones, and prepare yourself. This is Midnight Outcry. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share your thoughts in the comments, because once you step aboard, there may be no way back. Story 1. The ship smelled like old coffee and salt, and the atrium lights hummed with a nervous, mechanical patience. For a moment, I thought the whole vessel was holding its breath, as if waiting for something only it could sense. My name is Ethan R. Mallory. I'm 34 years old, and I work as an assistant archivist in Providence, Rhode Island. People laugh when I describe my job. It sounds like a fancy way of saying I file boxes all day, but it suited me. I've always been careful, the sort of person who notices footnotes, handwriting, the odd gaps in records no one else bothers with. That's partly why I booked this cruise. My sister, Sarah, died last winter after a short illness, and grief had crawled into every corner of my apartment. I thought a week on the ocean might let me breathe again. I wasn't looking for a party or adventure. I wanted silence, a horizon without interruptions. When I boarded the Ocean Valiant, the ship struck me as too polished, too rehearsed. Crew uniforms without a single crease, smiles fixed like photographs. My cabin on Deck 7 had a narrow balcony and a heavy sliding door that rattled when the engines pulsed. There was a life preserver mounted on the wall inside, bright orange against the beige, and I remember staring at it longer than I should have. The first oddity came almost immediately. As we pulled out of port, the loudspeakers crackled with the usual instructions, but the captain's announcement clipped out mid-sentence, a sudden hiccup in the middle of a word. A second later, silence. No apology, no repeat. Everyone around me shrugged it off, but something about the abrupt cut lodged itself in my chest. Later, as I explored the ship, I found a child's single shoe abandoned on a lounge chair near the pool. The leather was cracked from sun, the laces stiff with salt. No one seemed to claim it. Crew members walked past it as if it were invisible, even when I pointed. That night, in the dining hall, a man at the corner table, tan skin, thinning hair, eyes that scanned like radar, caught my gaze. He smiled faintly and murmured, almost too low to hear, "Keep your door on the chain." It sounded like advice wrapped in a joke, but his eyes didn't match the smile. Back in my cabin, I found a typed note slipped under the door. Plain white paper. 4 words in bold letters: "Remember the light." No signature, no explanation. The paper felt oddly cold, as though it had been left in a freezer before sliding under. I told myself not to overthink. People lose shoes. Speakers glitch. Maybe the note was a prank. But the next morning, as I made my way to breakfast, I noticed a maintenance bulletin pinned near the stairwell. In blocky type, it listed repair schedules, safety checks, all stamped with the date, June 14th. Except it was August. When I asked a steward about it, he smiled too quickly, said it was a misprint, and tore it down before I could look again. Small things, I thought. Grief makes omens out of nothing. Still, I started writing them down in a little notebook. Dates, times, fragments. Archivist's instinct. That evening, the corridors hummed with laughter from the casino, but when I stepped off the elevator on my deck, the air was hushed. Someone had taped a scrap of paper to the cabin opposite mine, but the ink had been scratched out until nothing remained but grooves. Later that night, as I sat in bed with the television murmuring for company, 3 slow knocks rapped against my door. Not urgent, measured, like a pulse. I froze, listening. Then again, knock, knock, knock. I looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty. only the faint glow of the emergency light and the silence of a place that felt wider than it should. I chained the lock and didn't sleep until dawn. The ship carried on with forced cheer, shuffleboard tournaments, karaoke, endless buffets. Yet I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. When I asked a lifeguard about the shoe still sitting near the pool, he shrugged, muttered something about lost property, and walked away quickly. That was when I found the photograph tucked under the tile by the water's edge. A black and white picture of a family standing on a deck, the kind of faded photo you'd see in an attic. Across the bottom, in shaky handwriting, "Don't let it out." The ink looked fresh. The lifeguard refused to touch it. Passengers walked around it without noticing, as if my eyes were the only ones that could see. I pocketed the photo. That night, the ship's engine thrummed so deeply I felt it in my teeth. And when I finally drifted off, I dreamed of corridors that looped back on themselves, doors that opened to black water and a face peering through the balcony glass. When I woke, the chain on my door was unlatched. I stared at the dangling chain as if it might move again on its own. My chest tightened. I knew I had latched it before sleeping. The chain didn't slip free easily. It had to be lifted, angled, pushed with intent. I told myself maybe I had done it half-heartedly. But even as the thought formed, I didn't believe it. The corridors outside felt different that morning. Brighter, yes, but too quiet. Most passengers were still at breakfast, so I took the chance to wander. Past the gift shops and the framed maps of the Caribbean, I found a service door slightly ajar. It smelled faintly of diesel and lemon disinfectant. Inside stretched a maintenance corridor, narrow, with exposed pipes hissing and a strip of fluorescent bulbs that buzzed irregularly. Archivist instinct overruled caution. I stepped in. Halfway down the corridor, a black marker line trailed along the floor, winding like a crude map. I followed until the hall dead-ended at a heavy gray door. A paper tag dangled from the handle. Maintenance. Do not enter. Ordinary enough, except someone had written over it in pen, "Remember the light." The words echoed what I'd already seen, and for a moment my hands trembled. I backed out before anyone caught me, blending into the crowd of passengers again. Later that day, on deck, a woman in her 50s leaned against the railing near me. She looked shaken, muttering that her husband had gone out for a smoke during the night and never came back. Crew told her he'd probably gotten drunk, wandered, maybe even slipped overboard. They offered her vouchers for a spa session and asked her to keep calm. She clutched a pack of cigarettes in her hand so tightly the cardboard crumpled. I wanted to believe it was an accident. People do fall from ships, but her eyes, red, sleepless, frantic, made me think of the note under my door. That night I heard music, faint, childlike, a lullaby, thin as air, floating down the stairwell outside my cabin at 3 in the morning. The kids' club was closed, lights dark, no footsteps. I stood barefoot in the corridor, pressing my ear to the metal wall. The melody swirled for a moment, then stopped mid-note. By now, I was carrying my notebook everywhere, jotting times, words, fragments like evidence. Crew passing by would glance at it, then look away quickly, as though afraid the act of noticing might implicate them. At breakfast, the tan man who'd warned me about the chain was gone. His seat sat empty, napkin folded with eerie precision. When I asked the waiter, he said flatly, "Sir, checked out early." Checked out? In the middle of the sea? The rest of the day, I forced myself to do normal things. Shuffleboard, trivia, a movie by the pool. But every laugh, every clink of glasses felt rehearsed. Like the whole ship was acting for itself. That evening, I found another note slipped under my door, "Don't go to AFT." I didn't realize I'd spoken aloud until the words left my mouth. If you're listening, take a second to subscribe to Midnight Outcry. It helps keep stories like this alive. I laughed nervously at myself, but the absurdity was the only thing holding back panic. The note stayed clenched in my hand all night. The following morning, I decided to push further. I traced back to the service corridor I'd found earlier. This time, the marker line led not to the "Do Not Enter" door, but around a corner I hadn't noticed before. The fluorescent lights here were dim, a few flickering so badly the walls seemed to breathe. At the end was another hatch. Small, round, metal, dented by years of hands. A faint hum seeped through it. Something deeper than engines, almost like chanting. I pressed my ear close. The sound shifted, became rhythmic, like dozens of feet stomping in unison. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I saw scratches on the paint, letters gouged by something sharp. Not deep enough to read clearly, but deliberate. Someone had tried to write a warning here too. I turned away quickly. Back upstairs, near the laundry, I found a folded towel on a bench. Inside it, hidden as if waiting for me, was a small note written in trembling handwriting, "He won't wake." I stuffed it in my pocket before anyone else could see. When I returned later, the towel was gone. That evening, the captain announced over the loudspeakers that we'd be holding a, quote, silent memorial for a passenger who'd tragically lost their life. He said it with a steady voice, offering condolences, but no name, no details. And the words, "lost their life," felt like a curtain draped over something uglier. Passengers muttered. A few cried quietly. Most just shuffled back to the buffet line. As the sun dipped, I walked the outer deck, wind tugging at my jacket. Far off, the horizon glowed red. My eyes fell on a deck chair where someone had left a magazine. Inside it, tucked between glossy ads, was another Polaroid. A woman's face scratched out, her features violently obscured. Across the bottom, written in ink, "The cabin changes." When I looked up, the magazine was gone. Only the wind remained. The Ocean Valiant seemed to carry its secrets like contraband, wrapped in towels and hidden in brochures. And I was beginning to think those secrets were meant for me alone. By the third night, sleep had become an enemy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady thrum of the engines below, wondering if the sound masked other noises, quieter, human ones. Around 3 a.m., I jolted awake to the faint scrape of metal. At first, I thought it came from my balcony, but when I stepped closer, the glass fogged with condensation as though someone had been breathing against it. I stood there, frozen, the ocean stretching blackly beyond, until I caught movement in the reflection. A shadow darted behind me, then vanished when I spun. My heart slammed against my ribs. The chain was latched, the door untouched. But I knew I hadn't been alone in that room. The following morning, the corridors were buzzing with gossip. Another passenger missing. A young woman, early 20s, had gone to the bar with friends and never returned. Security gave a statement in calm, rehearsed tones. She may have disembarked at the last port. We are investigating. But we were days from the next stop. The explanation hung in the air like smoke. Passengers whispered in clusters, glancing at the crew who moved briskly past them. But what unsettled me most was the way some crew members avoided eye contact entirely, as if even acknowledging our questions might breach some unspoken rule. That afternoon, I ducked into the library. Few people used it. Rows of travel guides, half-read thrillers, atlases with frayed spines. Tucked between two books, I found a maintenance log. The pages smelled of mildew, and on one line, scribbled in pen, was an entry that chilled me. 1999, third deck fire. Transfer initiated. No signature, no explanation, just those words. I folded the page and slipped it into my notebook. When I left, I noticed the same woman who'd lost her husband a few nights earlier sitting by the window. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't doing anything at all, just staring at the horizon with her hands folded neatly in her lap, like she'd accepted something inevitable. That evening, the ship hosted a gala dinner. The dining hall glittered with chandeliers, waiters balancing trays of wine glasses. Music played, light jazz, cheerful but hollow. I scanned the tables for the tan man who'd warned me about the chain, but his seat remained empty, untouched since the first night. Instead, another passenger sat there now, smiling as if he'd always belonged. Midway through the meal, the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to hush the room. When they steadied again, I glanced at my bread plate and froze. Resting neatly atop the napkin was a small white tag. On it, my name had been typed in black ink. No one sat close enough to have placed it there without me noticing. I I slid the tag into my pocket and excused myself. The corridors after dinner felt heavier, the air thick as if the walls were sweating. I followed the path toward the stern, remembering the warning, "Don't go to AFT." Maybe I was reckless. Maybe I was desperate to prove I wasn't imagining it all. The further I walked, the fewer passengers I saw. Music from the gala faded into muffled echoes. Ahead, a door I'd never noticed before stood slightly ajar. Inside was a narrow stairwell leading down. The smell hit me first. Diesel, salt, and something sweet that reminded me of burned plastic. I descended slowly, each step groaning underfoot. At the bottom was a refrigerated hold. Frost clung to the walls, my breath hanging in clouds. Crates lined the space, stacked high, each stamped with dates: 1999, 2003, 2008. I brushed ice from one lid and saw a name stenciled there. Not a product, not cargo, a person's name. Shivers traced my spine. I opened the notebook and compared. The name matched one of the missing passengers. In the silence, I heard a faint melody. A music box, its tinny song winding down. Following the sound, I found a small brass toy resting on a crate. I reached out and touched it. The tune cut off instantly. Behind me, something shifted. A shadow flickered against the frosted wall, small, childlike, though no one stood there when I turned. My throat went dry. I stumbled back up the stairs, heart pounding, ears filled with the sound of my own breath. When I burst into the corridor above, a crew member stood waiting, his face calm, practiced. "You shouldn't be down there," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, almost parental. "Why?" I demanded. He smiled faintly. "Because the ship remembers." He let go, turned, and walked away. His footsteps echoed until the sound dissolved into the thrum of the engines. That night, I locked the chain and wedged a chair against the door. I lay awake listening to every creak, every hum, every faint knock. At some point, just before dawn, I dozed and woke to the sharp click of a camera shutter. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty, but on the nightstand lay a glossy Polaroid. It showed me, asleep in my bed. The Polaroid trembled in my hands. My face stared back, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, chain on the door clearly latched. Whoever had taken it had stood exactly where I was standing now. My skin prickled cold. I searched the room, pulling open drawers, yanking back curtains. Nothing. No footprints on the carpet, no trace of another presence. Only the photo, still damp from developing. I shoved it into my notebook and dressed quickly. I needed answers, even if I hated what I'd hear. The corridors that morning buzzed with forced cheer, cruise staff announcing bingo games, a steel drum band clattering on deck. But the passengers looked different now, nervous, subdued, eyes flicking at shadows. At the reception desk, I demanded to speak with the captain. The clerk smiled blandly, hands folded. "The captain is unavailable at the moment, sir." "Then tell me why passengers are disappearing. Tell me why someone was in my room last night." Her smile didn't flicker. "Sir, perhaps you've overindulged. It's common at sea. Disorientation, vivid dreams." I leaned closer. "And the notes? The photographs?" For the first time, her expression changed. Just a fraction, her eyes tightening. Then she lowered her voice and said, "You've already been noted. Don't make it harder on yourself." Before I could ask what that meant, another staff member appeared, steering her away. I wandered in a daze. The ship felt smaller, its cheerful announcements more sinister. A game of trivia boomed through the PA, but the questions dissolved into static midway through. A man spilled his drink at the bar and looked at me with wide, frantic eyes before staff swept him away. By evening, I forced myself back to the aft corridors. If the ship had secrets, they were there. The hatch to the refrigerated hold was locked now, a fresh seal across it. But a thin draft of cold still seeped from the edges. Beside the hatch lay another tag. This one didn't bear my name, just a number. 314, my cabin number. I staggered back to my room. On the bed sat another Polaroid, waiting neatly on the pillow. This one showed me standing in the corridor, notebook in hand, staring at the very hatch I had just left. I bolted. I found myself on the upper deck as the sun dropped, the horizon smeared in bruised red. The woman who'd lost her husband stood near the railing again. Her lips moved as if praying, but no sound came. When she noticed me, her gaze sharpened. She whispered, "They keep us cataloged. That's all we are, records." "What do you mean?" I demanded. Her voice cracked. "When your tag shows up, it means you've already been filed." She turned away, shoulders shaking, and walked into the crowd of passengers. I couldn't breathe. My notebook felt heavier than ever, filled with dates, names, fragments that now seemed less like evidence and more like the ledger of a library I didn't understand. That night I barred the door again, but sleep came anyway, dragging me under like a riptide. When I woke, it was to the sound of footsteps in my cabin. I held my breath. A shadow leaned over me. A hand pressed something into my chest, then withdrew. The air smelled of salt and old paper. I snapped on the lamp. No one was there. On my chest lay another tag. White, glossy, printed in the same neat typeface. This time it didn't bear my name or number, just 2 words, "Transfer complete." Panic clawed my throat. I threw open the balcony door, gulping cold air. The sea stretched black and endless, and in the reflection of the glass behind me stood not my own shape, but a blurred figure with eyes like drowned stars. I spun. Nothing. The next morning, an announcement crackled overhead. Calm, rehearsed, final. Observation concluded. Thank you for your cooperation. Passengers carried on with breakfast, chatting, laughing. But when I glanced around, no one looked at me. Not one face turned my way. Back in my cabin, the mirror over the sink fogged as though someone had breathed across it. Slowly, letters formed in the condensation, traced by an unseen hand, "Remember the light." My notebook lay on the desk, pages fluttering though no window was open. The Polaroids slipped free, scattering across the carpet, and among them was one I had never taken, never seen. It showed the ship's hold, rows of crates, stacked high. On the closest crate, stamped in black letters, was my full name. I blinked hard, stomach dropping. When I looked again, the photograph was gone. Only the empty carpet remained. But I can't shake the certainty that somewhere, down in the cold belly of the Ocean Valiant, there's a crate waiting for me. And I don't know if I've already been placed inside it. Story 2. The cruise ship had always promised luxury, adventure, and the thrill of the open sea. But for Sophia Klein, it was supposed to be an escape, a week away from her high-stress corporate life in New York. She had booked a solo cabin on Deck 7, hoping for quiet nights and ocean views. What she didn't anticipate was the presence waiting just beyond the balcony door. As soon as she stepped into her cabin, a strange chill brushed against her skin, though the thermostat read 72. The air felt heavier here, almost like it carried the weight of unseen eyes. She shrugged it off, unpacking her suitcase, trying to convince herself it was just pre-vacation jitters. By the second night, subtle things began. A low humming, almost imperceptible, echoed through the corridor. Sophia paused, listening intently, but the sound disappeared the moment she moved toward the door. She chalked it up to the ship's machinery, though her instincts screamed otherwise. Then came the first. The reflection in her cabin mirror showed a shadow lingering behind her, just for a split second. Each time she glanced, it vanished, leaving only the normal reflection of her own tense face. She tried to laugh it off, telling herself she was exhausted, that stress and travel could play tricks on the mind. But the cabin seemed to respond to her movements, the lights flickering at random, and her suitcase mysteriously shifted position overnight. One morning, she woke to find it open, her clothes neatly folded, but not by her. The unease began to build like a wave she couldn't escape. On night 3, the real suspense escalated. Sophia heard footsteps pacing outside her cabin, slow and deliberate. When she cracked the door open, the corridor was empty, yet the faint smell of salt water mixed with something metallic lingered in the air. Her pulse quickened. This was no ordinary cruise. In a corner of the hall, she spotted a figure standing perfectly still, tall and thin, head tilted, as though observing her every move. The moment she blinked, it was gone. A whisper followed, just at the edge of hearing, "You don't belong here." Fear mingled with fascination. Sophia knew she had to document what was happening. She set up her phone to record overnight, hoping to capture proof of the paranormal presence. By morning, her footage revealed blurred shapes moving through the cabin, objects slightly shifting in impossible ways. She realized this cruise ship held secrets, memories trapped within the walls, shadows of past passengers, or perhaps something darker. Sophia resolved to investigate further, walking the decks at night, observing patterns, sensing presences where no one else seemed to notice. Every creak, every hum, every flicker of light became a clue in the real haunting she had stumbled into. And so, her journey began, alone, terrified, yet compelled to uncover what the ship had hidden for decades. The second night was worse. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone in her cabin. Every creak of the ship, every whisper of wind against the hull seemed amplified, echoing through the narrow hallways. She sat on her bed, phone recording, heart hammering, replaying the footage from the previous night. The blurred shapes, fleeting and indistinct, seemed almost purposeful, as if they were trying to communicate. She forced herself to step out onto the balcony. The moonlit ocean stretched endlessly, waves shimmering like liquid silver. Yet the horizon felt wrong, somehow closer than it should be. A shadow flickered across the water, just beyond the rail, moving in ways the current couldn't explain. Sophia blinked, and it was gone. Back inside, the lights began to flicker violently, plunging her cabin into intermittent darkness. In those brief blackouts, she could hear breathing, slow, deliberate, and not her own. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch toward her, reaching along the floor and walls like dark smoke. A sudden banging came from the cabin next door, loud and insistent. The sound paused whenever she stepped toward it, then resumed once she backed away. She pressed her ear to the wall and froze. There was no one inside, no footsteps, no voice. Only a rhythmic scratching, almost like fingernails against wood. She remembered the old cruise forums she had read before booking, the ones detailing strange encounters, people claiming they had glimpsed passengers who had never disembarked. Could she be experiencing the same? Sophia shivered. The realization hit her. This ship wasn't just haunted. It was alive, aware, feeding off the fears of those aboard. In the hallway, a shadow detached itself from the wall, taking the shape of a man in an old-fashioned uniform. His face was featureless, but the posture was rigid, commanding attention. Sophia stumbled backward into her cabin, knocking over her chair. The figure lingered in the hall, then vanished when she dared to look again. Despite her fear, curiosity compelled her forward. She began to explore the ship at night, camera in hand, recording every corridor, every stairwell, every empty lounge. She noticed patterns, doors that opened on their own, rooms that seemed to appear and disappear depending on the deck, and fleeting glimpses of people dressed in outdated cruise attire, vanishing when approached. Then came the Ezaid. While reviewing footage in the lounge, she noticed a reflection in a polished brass railing. Behind her, a small child in a sailor suit stood silently, staring directly into the camera. She spun around, but no one was there. The chill crawling down her spine was accompanied by a whisper so soft it almost blended with the ocean wind. "Don't follow us." Sophia realized she had a choice. To leave, to retreat to the safety of ignorance, or to delve deeper into the secrets that had trapped so many passengers over the years. Something about the energy of the ship, the palpable presence of the unseen, both terrified and enthralled her. She decided to continue documenting. Each night, The manifestations grew bolder. Objects moved on their own, drawers opened and closed, and unseen hands tapped on windows. The recorded sounds were faint, almost imperceptible, but the irregular tempo carried an unmistakable intelligence, a deliberate pattern. By the end of the week, Sophia had compiled hours of footage, evidence of something truly supernatural, but she couldn't explain it logically. The shadows, the whispers, the appearances of past passengers, all pointed to a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to face. This ship existed between worlds, a liminal space where the living and the dead intersected. And as the cruise approached its final port, Sophia knew the final revelation awaited her. Something on this ship wanted her to understand. Something wanted her to see what had happened, and what could happen. The following night, Sophia felt the weight of the ship's presence more than ever. She hadn't slept properly. Every creak and groan of the hull sounded deliberate, as if it were whispering warnings just beyond comprehension. Clutching her camera, she moved through the dim corridors, every footstep echoing unnaturally. The fluorescent lights flickered again, creating elongated shadows that seemed to slither along the walls. As she passed the dining hall, she noticed something chilling. The tables were set, but no one was there. Plates gleamed under the flickering lights, and silverware lay neatly aligned, yet the air carried the faint smell of decay. The camera picked up whispers this time, soft, overlapping voices, discussing meals, laughter, and arguments, as if the room were trapped in an endless past. Sophia followed a trail of faint footprints leading to the grand staircase. They were small, childlike, yet impossibly old, as if the person who left them had stepped out of time itself. She hesitated, hand trembling as she touched the railing, when suddenly a cold hand brushed against her shoulder. She spun around, empty hallway. Her heart raced. In the mirrored panels lining the walls, Sophia saw movement behind her. Figures appeared briefly, always blurred. Children in sailor suits, women in vintage dresses, men in faded uniforms, all staring at her. None spoke, but their eyes held a warning: leave now, or remain forever. Determined, she pressed on, moving toward the lower decks. The ship's engine hummed louder here, vibrations coursing through the metal floor. Doors opened and closed at random, and the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if alive. Her flashlight caught something in the corner of the hallway, a journal, bound in worn leather, seemingly untouched by time. Opening it, she read entries from a crew member decades ago, detailing, quote, disappearances, visions of passengers lost at sea, and warnings of the ship itself choosing its victims. The entries were frantic, written in uneven scrawl, detailing how the ship didn't just sail the ocean, it sailed between realities. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the deck. "You shouldn't be here." Sophia spun around, flashlight cutting through darkness. No one was there, but the temperature dropped sharply, her breath fogging in the air. Whispers became a chorus, multiple voices overlapping, repeating her name, pleading, warning, threatening. Sophia realized the truth. The ship had marked her. The shadows weren't random, they were aware, watching, testing, waiting for her to see. Every step she took deeper into the lower decks brought her closer to understanding and closer to danger. A faint light glowed at the end of the corridor. She moved toward it, heart hammering. The light came from a small, abandoned lounge, decorated in faded elegance, untouched by decades. Chairs sat in a circle, facing inward. In the center, a single chair rocked gently, empty, creaking as if an unseen figure occupied it. She raised her camera, capturing the eerie sight. A whisper drifted. "Don't leave." "Stay." Sophia froze. The shadows converged, forming the shape of a conductor, tall, uniformed, face obscured, pointing toward her. She realized the shadows weren't trying to harm her. They were trying to communicate a secret. Something catastrophic had happened on this ship before, something the crew had covered up. The whispers carried clues, hints of a ritual, a tragedy, and the fact that those lost weren't gone. They were trapped, reliving their last moments eternally. Sophia backed out slowly, but the whispers followed, guiding her to the cargo hold. Here, the air was heavy, thick with the smell of rust and seawater. Crates lined the walls, some open, revealing objects from passengers long gone, children's toys, hats, old uniforms. Shadows danced across the floor, forming fleeting faces, frozen expressions of terror, sadness, and pleading. She realized with a cold dread that the ship was feeding on memories, keeping them alive in a spectral loop, and anyone who tried to uncover the truth risked becoming part of it. And then she heard it. A child's laughter, echoing from the crates, followed by the chilling whisper, "You can join us, forever." Sophia's hands shook as she clutched the camera. She backed away, turning to leave, but the hallway had changed. Doors that weren't there before now sealed her path. Corridors twisted unnaturally, and the shadows converged into a single form, blocking her escape. She realized her journey was far from over. The ship wasn't just haunted. It was alive, aware, and now it knew she was aware too. Sophia's breath came in shallow gasps as she stumbled through the warped corridor. The walls seemed to pulse, narrowing and stretching as if the ship itself were alive and aware of her panic. Shadows clung to her every step, stretching across the floor like dark fingers. She raised her camera, hoping the lens could somehow make sense of the impossible. But each image was distorted, faces morphing into anguish and fear before her eyes. A soft sound caught her attention, footsteps, measured, deliberate, echoing behind her. She spun around. Empty. But the lingering echo told a different story. It was too heavy, too deliberate to be hers alone. Panic surged. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Ahead, the hallway ended in a narrow stairwell descending into the ship's underbelly. A dim green glow emanated from below, revealing the lower engine room, a place the crew had warned her never to enter. But she knew instinctively this was where the truth waited. Descending the stairs, the air grew oppressive. Oil and rust mingled with something else, something ethereal, almost sweet, yet suffocating. Whispers enveloped her, louder now, overlapping, "Stay, see, join, lost, never leave." Sophia's grip tightened on the railing as she fought the growing nausea. Reaching the engine room, she froze. The machinery lay silent, rusted and frozen in time, yet the shadows danced across the walls as if fueling the old engines with memories. In the center, a pool of water reflected the ceiling, but the reflection was wrong. Faces stared back at her, crew members, passengers, even herself. Distorted, screaming silently. A single whisper broke through, "You shouldn't have come here." Sophia turned sharply. From the far side of the room, a tall figure emerged, uniformed like the captain of the ship. But his face was obscured, features melted into shadow. His movements were unnatural, limbs bending slightly too far. Each step he took caused the shadows to ripple, reaching toward her. She realized this figure wasn't just a ghost. It was the manifestation of the ship itself, the vessel's consciousness. Everything she had witnessed, every whisper, every moving shadow, all of it was alive. It had learned, adapted, trapped those who had dared uncover its secrets. Sophia tried to flee, but the exits twisted before her eyes. Corridors she had walked just moments ago now looped back impossibly. Reality itself had warped. The whispers surrounded her, growing urgent. "Help us. Leave. Become." Frantically, she scanned the room and saw an old crate. Inside lay logbooks, papers, and artifacts from past voyages, the evidence she needed. Hands trembling, she grabbed the nearest journal. The pages revealed the ship's horrific history, disappearances, unexplained deaths, and a chilling pattern. Anyone who uncovered its past risked becoming part of it, trapped in spectral limbo. Suddenly, a voice whispered directly into her mind, "You saw too much." The figure advanced, shadows stretching like black rivers across the floor, curling around her legs. She screamed, but no sound escaped. The walls seemed to close in, crushing her. In desperation, she slammed the journal against the floor. The shadows recoiled for a fraction of a second. In that brief moment, she noticed a hatch leading to the outer deck, partially open. The wind outside howled, carrying the scent of sea and salt. She sprinted toward it, dragging her legs through shadows that clawed at her heels, whispering threats, promises, and secrets. As she emerged onto the deck, the storm had intensified. Waves crashed against the hull, soaking her instantly. The night sky was pitch black, but the ship glowed faintly with an unnatural hue, almost alive, pulsating like a heartbeat. She realized the ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a predator, and the ocean itself was its hunting ground. With one last glance at the deck, she felt the presence of every soul trapped within, countless passengers, crew, children, all staring, pleading, warning her. The figure appeared behind her in the reflections of the water, closer than any human should be, yet vanished when she turned. She remembered her camera. Holding it up, she captured a final image, hoping it would tell the world what the ship had hidden for decades. But when she glanced at the screen, her own face was distorted, eyes hollow, the shadows of the lost dancing behind her. She bolted to the lifeboat ladder, her muscles burning, adrenaline screaming through her veins. The ocean roared around her, the storm lashing like an angry sea god. But she reached the lifeboat. As the ship receded into the darkness, the whispers faded, leaving only the pounding of her heart. Sophia survived, but she knew the truth. The ship was still alive, still hungry, still waiting, and anyone daring enough to sail near it in the dead of night could become its next story. Story 3. It always starts with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, pressing kind that makes you second-guess whether you're truly alone. That's what I felt as I first stepped onto the deck of the Aurora Dawn, a cruise ship supposedly mothballed after years of technical failures. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm a freelance journalist, the kind of guy who gets called when a story is too weird for mainstream press but too tempting to ignore. When I first got the tip about this ship, it came from a late-night email with no sender name. Just 4 words: Aurora Dawn, don't board. Of course I boarded. The ship was massive, towering over the harbor like a slumbering beast. Its paint was chipped, rust streaks bleeding down its sides. From the outside it looked abandoned. But the strangest thing, as I approached, the lights inside flickered on, as if the ship knew I was coming. That single moment sealed it for me. I wasn't just walking into another ghost story. I was walking into something alive. The first steps onto the deck were unsettling. The boards groaned under my weight, but it wasn't the creak of old wood. It was closer to a sigh, like an exhale of something that had been holding its breath for too long. Inside the grand lobby, I found signs of a ship frozen mid-life. Half-empty glasses on tables, chairs knocked slightly askew, luggage left at the foot of staircases. It looked like the passengers had simply vanished mid-step, like someone had snapped their fingers and stolen them away. Then I saw the portraits. Along the main hall hung framed photos of past captains. Most of them were normal, stern faces, pressed uniforms. But the last portrait was different. The frame was cracked, the glass shattered across the face. And where the captain's eyes should have been, the photo was smudged black, like burned paper. My chest tightened, and instinct told me I wasn't alone. I raised my recorder, hit the red button, and whispered into it. Entry 1. Something is watching me. The deeper I went, the worse it became. The ballroom smelled faintly of seawater, though no windows were open. The chandeliers above swung, though there was no breeze. In one corner, I swore I heard faint laughter. Children, giggling, distant, but sharp enough to freeze me in place. I turned toward the sound, empty, but the polished floor beneath the chandelier bore small, wet footprints, leading toward the stage and disappearing into nothing. The realization settled in. I wasn't trespassing on an abandoned cruise ship. I was trespassing on a memory that refused to die. And memories, when left to rot, can become something monstrous. I pressed my back against the ballroom wall, forcing myself to breathe through the sudden weight in my chest. The recorder in my hand felt heavier now, like it had absorbed some of the dread clinging to the air. Entry 2, I whispered, though my voice cracked. There are signs of life here, or something pretending to be life. That's when I noticed the stage curtain swaying, not in rhythm with the chandeliers above. Not with any logic. It twitched like a muscle spasm, jerking side to side, quick bursts of motion that stopped the moment I took a step closer. Then the music started. It was faint, scratchy, like an old gramophone needle dragging across a warped record. The tune was unrecognizable, but the rhythm was all wrong, like a waltz sped up and slowed down in the same breath. The sound didn't come from any visible speaker, just the walls themselves, vibrating with the melody. My stomach dropped. Because layered beneath the warped tune was something else. Low, guttural whispers, dozens of them, too faint to catch words, but I could swear they weren't in English. I edged toward the curtain, lifting it with 2 fingers. Behind the stage was only darkness. No props, no instruments, nothing but black. Except for a single chair, spotlighted by nothing I could see, sitting dead center, and in that chair was a life jacket. Not a modern one, but the bulky orange kind used decades ago. Straps torn, foam split open. Across its chest, written in marker, was a name, Evelyn. I stumbled back, heart pounding. That name, it rang in my ears like I'd heard it whispered earlier. Maybe in the laughter, maybe in the walls. I didn't know anyone named Evelyn, but suddenly the name felt heavier than my own. I muttered to myself, "This isn't right. This isn't just abandoned." Something moved on the edge of the stage. Not a curtain this time, a figure. Small, child-sized. I couldn't make out details, just a silhouette in the dark. "Who's there?" I called out. It didn't move. I took a shaky step forward, then another. My shoes scuffed against the warped wood. The figure tilted its head at me, slow, unnatural, as though the neck resisted the motion. Then it smiled. Not a grin I could see clearly, but the impression of one, wide and sharp, glowing faintly in the dark before it faded. And just like that, the curtain dropped shut, heavy and final. The ballroom was silent again. But silence doesn't mean safety. Not here. The curtain falling on its own should have been my cue to leave. But something about the ballroom, about the name Evelyn, kept me tethered there like an anchor. I forced myself to walk across the warped floorboards, each groan of wood louder than the last. My recorder shook in my hand as I spoke. Entry 3. The ballroom isn't empty. I'm not sure what I saw, but there was a figure. And a name. Evelyn. Saying it out loud made my throat tighten. That's when I noticed the grand piano in the corner. It hadn't been there when I walked in, I was certain of it. But now, under a faint shaft of moonlight sneaking through a cracked skylight, it sat waiting. Its black lacquered surface was coated in dust, but the keys gleamed as though polished yesterday. My gut said, "Don't touch it," but my feet ignored me. I pressed one key, softly. A low note reverberated through the ballroom, deeper and sharper than it should have been. Then another key, depressed on its own, higher pitched. The 2 tones didn't match, didn't belong, but together they made something like a question, and then the ship answered. From the walls, a chorus of whispers rushed in, louder this time, distinct. I froze as I realized they weren't just whispering random sounds, they were chanting a single word. Over and over. Evelyn, Evelyn, Evelyn. My stomach lurched. The chandeliers above rattled, dust spilling like ash. The room seemed to tilt, as though the ship itself was remembering the sea. I backed away, muttering to myself, "This isn't real, this isn't real." But then, on the far side of the ballroom, a set of double doors creaked open. Beyond them was no hallway, just a staircase spiraling downward into shadows that swallowed the light whole. I felt it then. The pull, like gravity had shifted. Like if I didn't go down there, the ship would never let me leave. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally learn why Evelyn's name was stitched into this vessel's rotting bones. But the deeper you go into a ship that should be dead, the more it remembers being alive. The spiral staircase felt wrong from the very first step. The wood was slick, damp, and curved more tightly than seemed possible for a ship of this size. My flashlight beam barely cut the dark, only to be eaten by shadows that seemed to move closer the further I descended. Each step groaned like a dying breath, and with every sound, the whispers above twisted into laughter. Not human laughter. Hollow. Mocking. Like the ship itself was amused by me. When I finally reached the bottom, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor that didn't belong on any blueprint. The walls were lined with rivets and steel, but the air was so thick with salt that my lungs burned. Doors stretched down both sides, identical, unmarked, and far too many for a lower deck. I tried one. It opened easily. Inside was a small cabin. Dust-covered suitcases lay stacked in a corner, untouched for decades. But the bed, God, the bed was made perfectly, as if awaiting a guest. A faint perfume clung to the air, sweet and cloying, almost floral. I whispered into my recorder, "Cabin pristine. Looks lived in." The second I said it, I heard movement, a faint shift of fabric. My light caught the edge of the bed, and for a heartbeat, there was an impression in the sheets, as though someone had just risen. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My flashlight flickered, then steadied on the mirror across the room. The reflection showed me standing there, pale and panicked, and a woman standing right behind me. I didn't breathe. I didn't turn. Her outline was soft at first. Her head tilted slightly, hair flowing down over her shoulder. She leaned close enough that I could feel the icy brush of her presence against my ear. And then she spoke. Just one word. "Stay." The light died. When it flicked back on a second later, the bed was unmade. The perfume gone. The door swung open by itself. My recorder clicked off without me touching it. I staggered out into the hall, chest heaving. The corridor had changed. Now every door down the passage had a nameplate. I squinted through the dust and saw them glinting in my flashlight. Thomas, Claire, Samuel, Evelyn. That last one froze me. The brass plate looked newer, polished, almost glowing. And it wasn't just a name. Below it, etched faintly, was a date. July 14th, 1952. The night the ship was supposed to have gone down. If her cabin was waiting for me, then maybe, just maybe, she still was too. I stood frozen in that impossible corridor, the beam of my flashlight trembling against Evelyn's nameplate. My fingers brushed the brass, and the metal burned cold against my skin, as if I had just touched ice. The door creaked open without me pushing it. Inside, the cabin looked like a photograph preserved in amber. Every detail was intact: a vanity with a silver hairbrush, lace curtains swaying, though the air was dead still, and on the desk, a letter sealed in red wax. My heart thudded. The wax hadn't melted, hadn't cracked, not in 70 years. I whispered into my recorder, this room shouldn't exist. The letter drew me like a magnet. My hand shook as I broke the seal. The paper was fragile, yellowed, but the ink looked fresh. The handwriting was elegant, looping. To whoever finds this, know that the ship was never meant to sail again. We were all chosen, bound to waters that would never let us leave. The captain made a pact, and now the ship is the offering. The names on these doors, they are the ledger. Each traveler who boards is counted. When the debt is due, the ship takes what it's owed. The final line chilled me, and if you are reading this, your name has already been added. I dropped the letter, my pulse roaring in my ears. On the vanity mirror, I saw my reflection, but carved into the glass beneath my image was a single word: Michael, my own name. The cabin door slammed shut. The curtains whipped violently, though there was no wind. My recorder clicked on by itself. Through its tiny speaker, Evelyn's voice whispered, "Stay." The lights in the room went out. Total darkness swallowed me. I stumbled backward, clawing for the door handle, but the air thickened, pressing against me like invisible hands. My flashlight flickered once more, landing on the bed. Evelyn was lying there now, perfectly still, pale, eyes open, watching me. She sat up in one slow, unnatural motion, her lips curling into the faintest smile. "He made a pact. Now it's your turn." The recorder crackled louder, as though hundreds of voices had joined hers, chanting in unison. The walls began to drip with seawater, rising fast across the floor, soaking my shoes. The ship itself groaned, shuddering as if waking from slumber. I hurled myself at the door. It burst open. The hallway beyond was gone, replaced by the open sea. Black waves stretched endlessly, the corridor now nothing but a gangplank leading straight into the abyss. Behind me, Evelyn's voice echoed, sweet and commanding, "Jump or stay forever." I don't remember deciding. I only remember the sensation of falling. When I jolted awake, I was on the main deck. Morning's sun blazed over calm waters. Crew members bustled past as though nothing had happened. My recorder was in my pocket. I pressed play. It was still recording. My voice spoke first, panicked, begging. Then Evelyn's reply, clear, undeniable. "Your name is written." The tape ended with the sound of the sea rushing in. And even now, nights later, when I play it back again, there's something new. A faint, scratching sound layered beneath the voices. Like metal against wood, the sound of someone carving a name into a door. My name. Story 4. The first time I noticed him, he wasn't moving, just standing in the middle of the grand lobby with an empty tray in his hands, staring at me through the crowd as if he already knew who I was. My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 33, a travel nurse from Oregon who doesn't usually splurge on vacations. But after 3 brutal months of back-to-back night shifts, I decided I'd earned it. A week-long Caribbean cruise on the Elysian Dawn. It was supposed to be fun, sun-soaked, maybe even a little reckless. Everything about the ship looked normal that first day. Kids racing up the stairs to the water slides, older couples staking out lounge chairs, a band playing steel drums near the pool deck. I remember laughing at myself for feeling nervous. It was just a trip, just a floating hotel. But then I saw him again. Same uniform as the other waiters, white shirt, black vest, but something was off. His clothes looked rumpled, like he'd slept in them. His skin had that pale, clammy sheen you only notice when someone's sick, and his eyes never shifted, not once, locked on me like a shadow that refused to move. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was imagining things. But later that evening, when I went down to the dining hall, he was there too, standing near the corner where the light didn't quite reach. He didn't serve anyone. He didn't even blink, just stood, tray in hand, watching. I asked the couple at the next table if they noticed him. The husband glanced over, then frowned. "Who?" he asked. When I looked back, the corner was empty. That was the moment I stopped feeling like I was on vacation. That night I lay awake in my cabin, the low hum of the engines beneath me, like a constant pulse. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the man was a waiter. Maybe I'd caught him between shifts. But the image wouldn't leave me. His stillness. The way no one else seemed to see him. The next morning, I tried to enjoy myself. I walked the deck, ordered a drink, even joined a trivia game in one of the lounges. For a while, it almost worked. I felt normal again, until I spotted him outside the glass windows of the lounge. He wasn't inside with the rest of us. He was out on the deck, standing in the blazing sun, still holding that same tray. The odd part was that the wind was strong enough to send napkins flying across tables, but his hair, his clothes didn't move at all. When I glanced back after a double take, he was gone. By the third night, I couldn't convince myself this was just fatigue or imagination. Something was wrong. I even asked one of the staff casually, describing him. The waiter laughed politely. "Ma'am, we rotate shifts daily, but no one works in the uniform you described after hours." I tried not to let my voice shake. "So you're saying no one like that works here?" He gave me a confused look, like he thought I was making a joke. That evening, I returned to my cabin to find a folded napkin placed neatly on the desk. At first, I thought it was housekeeping, until I opened it. The words inside were written in dark, messy ink. "Don't eat! He's waiting!" I froze, the napkin trembling in my hands. No one else had access to my room, and yet someone, or something, had left me that warning. I thought about reporting it, but what would I say? That a phantom waiter had been following me since day one, slipping notes into my cabin. At dinner, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I kept glancing around, searching. For a while, it seemed like he wasn't there. Maybe I'd finally shaken him. But halfway through the meal, as the lights dimmed for the evening show, I caught sight of him again. Not across the room this time. Directly behind my chair, holding the tray. Silent, still. I didn't move. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth, hand trembling. Everyone else around me was laughing, clapping for the magician who had just stepped onto the stage. But I couldn't hear a thing over the thundering of my own heartbeat. I turned, just enough to glimpse over my shoulder. The chair behind me was empty. No waiter, no tray. Just an unclaimed seat at a crowded table. I swallowed hard, the taste of metal in my mouth. My body screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to sit through the rest of dinner, barely touching the food. Back in my cabin, I bolted the door, slid the safety chain across, and turned the lights on full. For a while, nothing happened. I even started to think I was safe. Maybe it was all stress. Maybe my brain was inventing patterns that weren't there. But around midnight, the lights flickered. Just once. Enough to make my stomach drop. And then I smelled it. Food. Rich, savory, like a roast being carved open. Except, it was wrong. Too strong, too metallic. The scent filling my cabin, as if the walls themselves were bleeding flavor into the air. The knock came a moment later. 3 slow, deliberate raps. I pressed my back to the wall, staring at the door. My breath came shallow, fast. The tray slid under the door. No hands, no body. Just the tray, impossibly forcing itself past the inch-high gap, scraping against the floor until it stopped in the center of the cabin. On it, a plate covered with a silver dome lid. My entire body screamed, "Don't touch it." But my hand moved anyway, trembling, pulling the lid up. The plate didn't hold food. It held a folded cruise manifest, my cabin number circled in red. And beneath it, the words, "You already ate." My stomach lurched, my throat burned. I stumbled back toward the bathroom, gagging, though I hadn't taken a bite all night. My hands shook violently against the sink. When I looked up into the mirror, I saw him. The waiter, standing just over my shoulder, tray balanced, watching me with eyes that had no pupils, and he whispered, so close I felt his breath on my ear, "Don't worry. There's always room for one more." I stumbled backward, slamming into the bathroom wall so hard the towel rack rattled, but when I spun around, nothing. Just the mirror, just my pale reflection staring back. The tray was gone, no manifest, no silver lid, not even a smear on the floor where it had scraped under the door. It was as if the entire encounter had been erased. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat on the edge of the bed until the first glow of dawn slipped under the doorframe. For a while, the daylight felt like safety. People moved outside, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and the normal ship announcements came over the speakers. For the first time in days, I almost believed I had imagined it all. Almost. At breakfast, I forced myself into the main dining room, desperate for normalcy. I kept scanning the staff, watching faces, waiting for him. But every waiter I saw was ordinary, tired, busy, too human. Then I noticed something chilling. At a table near the corner, a family of 4 was eating in silence, perfect silence. No clinking forks, no shifting chairs, not even chewing sounds. Their plates were piled with untouched food, but all 4 were staring blankly ahead, eyes fixed on nothing. And standing just behind them, half in shadow, was the waiter. My waiter. The same hollow-eyed figure, silver tray balanced effortlessly in his hands. Nobody else noticed. Not a single person turned their head. When the family finally stood, they left their food behind and shuffled out without a word. The waiter followed, vanishing behind them into the crowd. That was the moment I realized something dreadful. The ship wasn't haunted by one presence. It was feeding something, and the waiter wasn't just serving food. He was serving passengers. That night, I tried locking myself in again, double-checking the door, the latch, even jamming a chair under the handle. I stayed awake as long as I could, the hum of the engine steady under my feet. But exhaustion caught me sometime past 3. I woke up to a clatter. The chair had been moved. The latch was undone. The door stood slightly ajar, swaying with the ship's gentle motion, and outside in the hall, I heard the slow, rhythmic roll of wheels on tile. A serving cart, stopping directly outside my cabin. The door eased open another inch, and a hand, thin, pale, impossibly long, slid through the gap, setting something gently on the carpet inside. A fresh tray. On it, this time, not a note or a manifest, but my own passport, my photo scratched through with a black X. And beneath it, a bill. The total, 1 sol, paid in full. I didn't scream, not because I was brave, but because my voice wouldn't come out. My throat locked up as if someone had gripped it from the inside. The tray sat there, gleaming in the dim cabin light, my passport shining under that cruel X. The bill, crisp and final, like a receipt for something I hadn't agreed to but had already paid. My hand shook as I picked it up. The ink felt wet, like it had just been written. I stumbled backward, clutching the paper, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. But then, just outside the door, I heard it. The wheels again, slow, steady. Moving away this time. I waited until the sound faded, then lunged to the door. The hallway stretched empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. No cart, no waiter. Just the faint scent of burnt sugar, clinging to the air like perfume. I should have turned back. I should have locked the door and prayed. But some force, stupid, desperate curiosity, pulled me forward. I followed the scent, through the hall, down a stairwell, past doors marked crew only. Everywhere I turned, the ship felt off. Corridors too quiet. Cabins that should have been occupied standing open. Luggage inside, but no passengers. I passed a row of staterooms where the televisions were all on, each one showing static. Nobody sat inside to watch them. The scent grew stronger as I descended into the lower decks. Finally, I reached a door with no markings. Just steel, dented and stained with something dark at the base. My pulse roared in my ears. I pushed it open. Inside was a room that didn't exist on any cruise ship map. No beds, no luggage, no decor. Just rows of tables set like a banquet hall, each one stacked high with untouched food. Plates of fruit that never browned, meat that never cooled, desserts that never melted. And sitting at those tables were passengers, dozens of them. But they weren't eating, they weren't moving. They were slumped in their chairs, pale, mouths half open, eyes glazed. Some still clutched forks in their hands, frozen mid-motion. Their plates were full, untouched. Their skin looked drained, as if whatever kept them alive had been siphoned out. At the far end of the hall, the waiter appeared. The silver tray gleamed in his hands. But this time, it wasn't empty. On it lay a single plate, a slice of cake, white frosting, a candle burning on top. And written across the frosting in red letters were 3 words, "This is yours." The candle flickered, though no air stirred. The waiter lifted his head, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly. It wasn't a face at all. It was a blank mask of stretched, colorless skin. No mouth, no nose, only those hollow pits for eyes. He placed the plate at the nearest table and then turned toward me, slow, deliberate. His voice, when it came, was inside my head. Every ship must pay. Every passenger must dine. You are next. The candle flame went out, and the room plunged into darkness. Story 5. When I entered the Aurora Seas for the first time, I assumed I was simply enjoying a lavish cruise to get away from the bustle of the mainland. I'm Lucas Reyes, and I've done professional trips all over the world, but this was meant to be different. Something soothing, something typical, something secure. The ship was enormous, shining in the port lights, with people laughing and singing on every deck. On the 9th deck, I had reserved a single cabin, a small, comfortable space with a balcony that looked out over the lake. There was a slight coolness in the air as soon as I entered, as though the cabin had been waiting for me. I dismissed it as a draft and proceeded to unpack. The distant buzz of motors was relaxing as the ship drifted into the soft cadence of the ocean waves at evening. With the balcony doors open and the sea wind blowing in, I was by myself in my cabin. I heard a faint scratching sound coming from right outside the cabin door at that moment. I went cold. I initially persuaded myself that it was just another traveler, perhaps a late-night stray. However, the noise persisted. It continued, rhythmic, almost purposeful. My hand was shaking when I grabbed for the door handle. There was nobody. Only the deserted hallway leading into the night. I told myself that I had been traveling too much and that stress caused shadows to move, and I laughed uncomfortably at myself. Even after I locked the door and closed it, the scratching persisted. It appeared to lurk in the room's corners. I brought it up to the crew of the ship the following morning. They shrugged and smiled courteously. "Sir, ships are old. Settling sounds." I was not reassured by their smiles. There was something about their gaze that made them appear too alert, too composed, as though they were also anticipating something. I tried to sleep that night, but the scratching came back, closer and louder. I jumped to my feet as soon as I heard the whisper, "Lucas." I was so sure that my heartbeat would reverberate throughout the cottage. I had slammed the balcony door shut, but it was open. There was an odd, metallic smell in the seaside breeze. Too terrified to breathe, I closed the door and pressed myself against it. The creaking followed. It wasn't the typical ship floor groan, but rather a purposeful sliding motion across the cabin. Something invisible. Glancing across the room with my flashlight, I reached for my phone. The shadows moved strangely. The space felt alive, encroaching. I could just make out a faint, human-like shape in the corner, standing motionless enough to make me wonder whether I had dreamed it. My voice trembling, I spoke into the night. "Who's there?" No response. However, the darkness drew nearer. I knew the ship had captured my interest in a way I couldn't articulate by the time I dozed off in fits and squalls. Aurora Siege was more than a trip, it was a living thing. It was also observing. The ship's engines were humming softly as I woke up, but something wasn't quite right. The cabin had been a little chilly the previous night, but now it was oppressively cold. I attempted to convince myself that the previous night had been a dream or a symptom of my travel exhaustion as I massaged my eyes and tried to get rid of the uneasiness. The balcony caught my attention next. The drapes were flapping wildly in the wind, and the door was ajar. I had locked it, I was sure. I felt a wave of panic, but as I got closer, I saw footprints, something even worse. Tiny, damp, dragging over the carpet in the direction of the room's corner. With my heart pounding, I froze. At this hour, nobody should have been on the 9th deck, much less in my stateroom. I picked up my phone once more and tried to call the ship's security, but there was no tone. It was a dead line. I looked at my own image in the mirror, pale, eyes wide, gripping the phone like a lifeline. I hardly recognized myself. I turned back as the faint but clear murmur, "Lucas," came again. Nothing. There are only shadows that stretch strangely along the walls and twist when the ceiling lights flicker. My thoughts were racing. Maybe a crew member, a practical joke, anything that might be explained. I tried to reason. However, the chamber felt alive while I was thinking it, trembling a little beneath my feet, as though the ship itself knew I was there. I chose to look into it. I went down the corridor after the faint sound of scuffing. The corridor was longer than necessary and curved slightly, as though the ship's layout had changed. With the door slightly open, I came to a stop in front of cabin 923. I couldn't remember a single cabin here being unoccupied, let alone one that was designated for someone else. I peered inside and saw a room devoid of furnishings, walls that appeared to have been burnt, and a single rocking chair that was slowly swinging in the middle. No one sat in it, but it moved. Additionally, the name Lucas Reyes was engraved in the wood in letters. I felt a chill go down my back. My name. This is written. A shadow slipped by the doorway behind me before I could comprehend it. I spun around. The corridor is deserted, but then the lights went out and the whisper came back, with several voices now overlapping. Lucas, come, sit, stay. My heart pounding, I staggered back and almost fell over the balcony railing. However, I was afraid that the ocean itself was observing, so I dared not open it. I locked the door after running back to my cabin. My phone was still dead and not working. I was confined. By themselves. But not by themselves. Every sound, including the ship's groan, the scratching under the carpet, and the murmurs that blended into a symphony of doom, was accentuated as the night wore on. I came to see that this was more than simply a haunting, it was clever. The ship was familiar with me, understood my anxieties. It was also consuming them. Minutes passed, or hours. Time seemed pointless. Then there was a sudden, stifling, total quiet. I took a breath. Then the darkness came entirely out of the room's corner. Not merely a silhouette, but a figure, thin, unnaturally tall, with a face hidden, and arms that reached the ground. At the edge of the bed, it came to a standstill and stared without blinking. My own heartbeat was audible in my ears. I tried to talk, but my voice was not up to par. The figure approached slowly and purposefully. And then it said, in a voice like the grinding of metal, "You should have stayed ashore." I ran, snatching up a jacket, and made my way to the stairway, praying for light, for someone, for the main deck. The pathways twisted in an odd way, with steps leading into an unnatural darkness and doors opening to endless hallways. As they sang my name, the whispers grew louder and drew me closer to the center of the ship. At that moment, I understood that the Aurora Seas was a predator rather than a ship, and it preyed on me. I staggered through the hallways, twisting more than I should have at every turn. With its creaking walls, shifting floorboards beneath my feet, and lights that flickered in time with my pounding heart, the ship felt alive. I just knew I had to leave, had to get away from whatever force had taken possession of this ship, but I had no idea where I was heading. The murmurs became louder and more persistent. They were taunting me now, not simply calling my name. The words slithered through the air like smoke, slithering into my ears and mind. "Lucas, you can't leave. Stay forever." I came to a corridor with cabin doors lining it. I saw something unsettling in each as I went by, with each door's windows framing my own reflection. They were distorted representations of me, though not merely reflections. In some, my mouth gaped in mute screaming, and in others, my eyes bled shadows. Despite my best efforts to look away, every door pulled me in. Then, by itself, one door at the very end flung violently open. I went cold. The room was dark, but the dim light from a single lantern showed a terrifying sight. Dozens of personal belongings, including clothing, shoes, luggage, and watches, were floating in midair as though held by unseen hands. Slowly, they moved around the room, forming an apparently living vortex. Then I noticed a second figure, larger and darker than the shadow I had seen earlier. Pure malice emanated from its presence. Unnaturally, its head tipped slightly, and I knew I recognized it. May wasn't the key word. A humanoid version with vacant eyes and a smile that seemed to have sucked out all of the world's dread. It held up a hand and pointed right at me. The floating things accelerated, whirling about like a tempest. I tripped over my own feet and staggered back. The air became dense, weighty, and nearly solid, pressing like an unseen burden against my chest. I was having trouble breathing. I had a memory flash. I had read about the Aurora Seas online a few weeks before to the cruise. There have been reports of passengers going missing, videos of unnumbered cabins. Others on the crew denied ever seeing some decks. Then came the terrifying idea, what if the ship wasn't merely haunted? What if it collected individuals, transforming them into shadows and echoes of who they used to be, and then living off their fear? The figure drew nearer, its smile growing. I bolted after hearing a whisper that was both scary and almost tender. "We've been waiting," through halls that turned back on themselves, down stairwells that appeared to twist inexplicably. I tried several doors, but they were all locked or opened into the dark. The murmurs were always around me, sometimes coming from the front and sometimes from the back. I then arrived to the main dining room. Usually there was light, music, and laughter. It was empty now, filled with a faint, eerie green light. Tables and chairs were arranged at physics-defying angles and piled impossible heights. Everywhere I looked, shadows gathered, and I noticed dozens of individuals, each a warped image of a passenger I had seen before, their eyes hollow, their faces blank. At the same time, they turned to face me. I felt a chill go through me. I was encircled. But something else attracted my attention. A stairway down to the lower decks, where the ship's engine room should have been. From below, a dim light flickered. My gut told me that this was the only option, the only opportunity to face whatever was devouring the Aurora seas. I inhaled deeply before moving in its direction. With a chorus of voices blending with the ship's hum, the shadows screamed, attempting to drag me back. But I pressed on, going down into the unknown. The engine room at the bottom was not what I had anticipated. No buzzing engines, no screaming machines. Rather, a vast room with walls covered in mirrors, mirrors that reflected May rather than the space. And it's not just me, thousands of me, frozen in expressions of pain, despair, and dread. And the first shadow, now complete, waited in the middle, grinning. I was horrified to learn that the ship had not only been haunting me, but had also been waiting for me to arrive when its voice echoed through the room. "Welcome home, Lucas," to become involved with it. I could have stayed still and let the shadow take me, or I could have ran farther into the ship and risked the unknown. As if impatient, the floor underneath me shook and moaned. I overcame my panic and dashed toward a small hallway at the far end, where the mirrors reflected my every move, making the terror even more intense. The murmurs continued, but a new voice broke through the commotion, a soft, nearly human voice. "You can resist it. Stay away from that." Was it hope? Or a ruse? I had no time to reflect, knowing that whatever was waiting for me was closer than ever. I ran, plunging into the darkness and pursuing the dim light at the end of the corridor. The hallway appeared to go on forever, beyond than reason would let. My heart thumped and my lungs burned, yet I was unable to stop. I realized that the dim light in front of me was more than simply light. It was a signal, a pulse beckoning me along. It flickered like a heartbeat. The murmurs had intensified, now blending together in a frantic symphony. Some called my name in tones that made my skin crawl, while others scolded me and pleaded with me to stay. The shadows became more daring with each step I made, scuttling over the walls like dark water and extending their unnaturally long arms toward me. Then I was flung forward as the floor underneath me trembled fiercely. I stumbled upon a huge room that I hadn't seen on the deck drawings of the ship. High above, the roof arched, covered with weird, shimmering dirt that I couldn't name and ropes of seaweed. Salt, rotting, and a metallic odor filled the air. A scene that made my stomach turn was revealed by my flashlight. Dozens of bodies, or maybe echoes of them, hung in mid-air, cocooned in semi-transparent shells, mouths open in mute cries, limbs twisted, faces frozen in fear. Some were passengers I couldn't identify, and some were crew members I had previously seen. They were all frozen in a non-existent moment, staring blankly, caught between life and death. Then I saw it, the shadow, bigger than ever, standing on top of a heap of rubble, its shape changing, frighteningly solid, but nearly liquid. Its face contorted my features into a smile and laughed without saying a word. It was pointing right at me, and I could feel my soul being pulled coldly in my chest. It growled, the voice resonating above all the others. "You belong here. What is owed is taken by the ship." I forced myself to run and shook my head, saying, You will join us." However, the actual room had altered. The corridors twisted and duplicated, and the walls rippled like water. All my routes returned to this room. It was as if the ship had grown aware of my motions, learning, anticipating, trapping me in its nightmare heart. I required an alternative. My eyes flew about, seeking for anything that could give me an edge. That's when I saw it, a little ladder climbing upward, hidden behind a pile of crates. It led someplace, but it was small, barely large enough for one person. I climbed, struggling to hold on as the shadows brushed by me. Do not leave. Stay. Become. I finally made it to the top, stepping out onto a deck I hadn't visited. And I could hear murmurs now becoming distinct phrases, like a chorus singing in unison, while my hands scraped across metal and rotting wood. The sea around me infinity, seething and black, waves smashing against the boat. My eyes were burned by the salty droplets that the wind carried as it tore at my garments. I experienced freedom for the first time. However, the shadow was already there, lingering just below the deck with a faint red glow in its eyes. Like a predator rising out of the ocean, it rose from the depths at an impossible speed. With my pulse pounding, I turned and ran for the lifeboat section, hoping that the ship still had functional equipment. When I arrived at the lifeboats, I was shocked to see one ready, attached carelessly. I didn't think twice. Using a broken piece of metal to cut the rope, I climbed in. I wasn't expecting the engine to roar to life, but it did. I left the Aurora seas behind and pushed forth into the black waters. However, the ship did not diminish as I floated away. It expanded. Like tendrils, shadows arose from its deck and reached for me, for the lake. You can't escape, I thought, the murmurs turning into a deafening cacophony. Then, as abruptly as it had started, there was stillness. Black waves were all that remained once the ship disappeared beyond the horizon. I believed that I was alone. From the corner of my eye, I observed a slight ripple on the water's surface. A shadow spread across the seas, reflecting the ship's shape. It remained. It waited, never stops waiting. I told myself I had made it through as I paddled toward a far-off light on the horizon. But I knew in my heart that this was just a transitory situation. The seas of Aurora never forgot. It was not forgiving. It did nothing but wait for its next victim. I was reminded that a piece of me had been left behind, permanently linked to the ship's never-ending nightmare, as I saw my own reflection smiling back at me somewhere, deep in the darkness. Story 6. I woke to the ship creaking like it was trying to whisper a warning I couldn't quite catch. The corridors smelled faintly of salt and disinfectant, but beneath it there was something else, a metallic tang, sharp and cold, that didn't belong. My name is Ethan Riley. I'm 29, an IT consultant from Portland, Oregon. I've spent most of my life staring at screens, solving other people's problems, and convincing myself I liked routine. When my younger sister passed unexpectedly last year, I needed a break, not just a vacation, but a place where the world was finite and I could pretend everything outside the ship didn't exist. A cruise seemed perfect, somewhere the horizon couldn't be reached, where the water's endless hum might drown out the memories that gnawed at me. I was introverted, cautious, but desperate for something that might feel like a fresh start. The cruise ship, the Ocean Sovereign, was bigger than any of my expectations. Its decks rose in a sweeping curve, white against the early morning sky, balconies stacked like cards in a giant, gleaming tower. The engine thrummed beneath me, a persistent, almost comforting vibration, and announcements over the tannoy drifted through the corridors, a soft, practiced human voice against the ocean's roar. Welcome aboard the Ocean Sovereign. We wish you a safe and enjoyable journey. The word safe echoed oddly in my chest. I was assigned cabin 718, midship on deck 7. The room smelled faintly of polish and sea air, with a small balcony overlooking nothing but the rolling waves. Towels were folded into swans, soap bars carefully positioned. I unpacked slowly, tracing the patterns of the ceiling and floor, noting the tiny imperfections, a scuff on the railing, a nick in the wood trim that seemed strangely deliberate. By the second night, the first oddities started. It began with a faint tapping, intermittent, somewhere inside the hull, just beneath my bed. 3 slow taps. A pause. 2 quick ones. I told myself it was the ship settling, the metal contracting and expanding. But the taps followed me down the corridor when I left the room, echoing behind the doors of unoccupied cabins. A faint figure flickered at the corner of my eye, always gone when I turned. Other passengers seemed blissfully unaware. Couples laughed on balconies. Children ran along the promenade deck, clattering against the railings. The crew moved like cogs in a well-oiled machine, guiding, smiling, folding towels, and never breaking pace. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, a combination of grief and isolation, but every instinct screamed otherwise. By the third day, the ship's rhythm began to feel off. Announcements became slightly delayed, or sometimes repeated in a strange order. Lights flickered in the corridors where no one walked. Then came the cabin. Cabin 402, tucked into a less-traveled corner of Deck 4, had been sealed off by maintenance weeks before, but I caught a glimpse of it through a crack in the service door. The interior was unnervingly pristine, untouched, yet a shadow moved inside, just enough to suggest a presence that shouldn't exist. One evening I sat in the aft lounge, watching the ocean blacken beneath the night sky. A family nearby murmured about a missing passenger, an elderly man who had last been seen near the pool. The staff searched diligently, but their calm professionalism felt off, like they were hiding something more than just procedural mistakes. Later, I met a young woman, Mara, at the buffet. She had a notebook filled with scribbles, diagrams, and small sketches of hallways and doors. She whispered about whispers, strange reflections in the mirrors, and how crew members sometimes walked into areas only to vanish behind doors that never existed before. Her words were frantic but believable, a mirror to my own growing unease. If you're listening to this, take a second to subscribe to Midnight Outcry. It helps keep stories like this alive. She joked nervously, but the humor fell flat against the tension in her eyes. That night, the tapping returned at its precise rhythm, now unmistakably close. 3 slow. A pause. 2 quick. I pressed my ear to the balcony door. The ocean was calm, indifferent, a vast black mirror. No other sound, just the hollow echo beneath the deck plates. When I peeked into the corridor, shadows seemed to lean and bend, as if the ship itself were alive, testing me. I began to notice small absences. Crew members I had met earlier didn't appear in their usual stations. Certain doors I had passed multiple times were now locked or missing entirely. Every time I thought I understood the ship's layout, it shifted. The Ocean Sovereign felt like a place that had its own agenda, one I hadn't yet been allowed to understand. By the 4th day, the atmosphere thickened. A soft humming under the floors pulsed at irregular intervals, sometimes syncing with the tapping. At night, I could hear footsteps pacing outside my cabin, only to vanish when I strained to listen. Mirrors reflected figures that weren't there, reflections that lingered an instant too long before disappearing. Even the balcony lights seemed to flicker in acknowledgement, casting shadows that stretched and pulled toward me. I tried to share my experiences with other passengers, but most laughed or shook their heads. A few crew members offered vague explanations. Ships have memories. Metal resonates. Old vessels act strangely at sea. But the explanations were thin, and their eyes betrayed a kind of resigned awareness. They knew something I didn't. On the evening of the 5th day, the missing passenger situation escalated. Another guest, a man in his 50s, failed to return from the upper deck. Staff searched relentlessly, yet each search seemed to bring a sense of futility. I felt compelled to follow, tracing the ship's hidden corridors and service areas, and that's when I noticed it, a faint pattern in the floorboards, leading from the aft lounge down to a restricted service hatch on Deck 4. The tapping became louder, more insistent, almost guiding me toward it. I crouched before the hatch, hearing the persistent rhythm inside the steel beneath me. Heart hammering, I slowly opened it, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose was thick, metallic, carrying the scent I had first noticed, a cold, sharp tang, and beneath it, something else. Something like regret. The steps creaked beneath my weight. Every sound seemed amplified. The thrum of the engine, the hum of the ventilation, the distant laughter of passengers above, all merging into a dissonant symphony. And then I saw it, a shadow, human in shape, gliding along the far wall of the service corridor, yet impossibly elongated, moving without sound. I froze. The tapping stopped. The silence pressed against me, heavier than the steel and water around us. My rational mind screamed explanations, maintenance lights, trick of the eyes, stress. But every instinct in me knew the Ocean Sovereign was no ordinary ship. And then the whisper came, almost under my breath, brushing the nape of my neck. Don't follow. I wanted to run, to climb the stairs, to reach the open decks and the indifferent waves. But something rooted me to that shadowed corridor, something waiting, patient, deliberate. The ship had chosen its rhythm, and for the first time, I felt that I was just another note in its haunting melody. The Ocean Sovereign was no longer just a ship. It was a cage, a vessel with memory and intent, and I was only beginning to understand how deeply it could claim a passenger. The staircase groaned under my weight. As I descended further into the heart of the ship, the lights above flickered, struggling to illuminate the narrow service corridor beneath Deck 4. The hum of the engines was louder here, almost oppressive, vibrating through my chest in a rhythm that seemed to sync with my pulse. Every step carried me deeper into a world the passengers above didn't even know existed. A labyrinth of pipes, storage rooms, and maintenance closets that smelled of oil, rust, and something else I couldn't name. I kept my flashlight close, the beam trembling in my grip. The shadow I'd glimpsed earlier was gone, but I could feel its presence, a cold awareness that seemed to track me with each careful step. The tapping had stopped entirely, replaced by a faint scratching that echoed somewhere behind the bulkheads. I wasn't imagining it. Noises like this don't exist in empty corridors, unless someone or something is moving. I found myself drawn to a set of double doors, industrial steel painted a dull gray, with a small scratched sign that read, "Crew Only." The hinges groaned like a sigh when I pushed one open, revealing a small chamber with dim red emergency lights. The walls were lined with lockers, some dented, some open, and inside I saw personal effects of crew members, jackets, shoes, a single photograph of a smiling family. But one locker, the last in the row, was different. The door swung slightly, revealing a pair of empty eyes staring out at me, or so it seemed. I blinked, and the locker was empty. Only the faint scent of metal and cold lingered. The ship above was alive in its own rhythm. Occasionally, muffled laughter, distant music from the promenade deck, the occasional announcement filtering down through vents and shafts. But down here in the bowels of the Ocean Sovereign, there was only the whisper of moving water, the vibration of steel, and the certainty that I was being watched. I pressed onward, following a map in my head constructed from the strange sketches Mara had shown me. She had warned me, the ship has corridors that shouldn't exist. They shift, doors appear and vanish, and sometimes it keeps people. I tried to laugh at the thought, but my voice cracked in the empty corridor. At the end of a narrow passage, I found a hatch I hadn't seen on the ship's blueprints. It was slightly ajar, and a chill poured out from within. I crouched and peered inside, shining my flashlight downward. A spiral staircase descended into darkness, the walls slick with condensation. I heard it then, a faint whisper, almost like someone calling a name. muffled, distant, yet insistent. It could have been my imagination, but it sounded familiar. Compelled by a mix of fear and stubborn curiosity, I began my descent. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying that metallic tang I had noticed on the first night. The scratching had returned, now louder, rhythmic, almost impatient. The stairs seemed to narrow as I descended, the ship creaking and groaning around me. The light from above dimmed until I was swallowed by shadow, relying only on the trembling beam of my flashlight. At the bottom, I entered a small chamber. Pipes coiled along the walls, dripping water onto the metal floor. And in the center, a cabin. Not on any deck plan, not listed anywhere in the ship's records. A single door, polished and elegant, like it belonged on the promenade deck, not here in the maintenance levels. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The door swung open silently, revealing a room that looked normal at first glance. A bed neatly made, curtains drawn, a small writing desk. But then I saw the journal on the desk, open to a page scrawled in a familiar hand. It was Mara's handwriting. Do not follow. They watch. The ship remembers. If you are here, you will not leave. A cold wind blew through the room, though the door behind me had remained open only moments before. The floorboards creaked, and I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. Tall, thin, with features obscured by shadow, its head tilted as if examining me. I blinked. It was gone. My rational mind screamed at me to turn back, but something compelled me forward. The journal's pages flipped rapidly, as if caught in an unseen draft. Another page revealed a list of names: passengers, crew, dates of disappearance. Some were scratched out, others circled. My heart pounded in my chest. Mara's name was at the bottom, freshly circled. A sudden clang echoed through the corridor behind me. I whirled, flashlight trembling, but nothing was there. The door to the mysterious cabin slammed shut, cutting me off. Shadows pooled at the edges of the light, stretching, twisting, moving independently. I tried the handle, locked. The whispers came again, low and insistent, coming from the walls themselves. Leave or stay, forever. I pressed my ear to the door, listening to the faint thrum of the engine, the tap of water dripping somewhere, and beneath it all, breathing, slow, deliberate, right behind me. I spun around, empty corridor, yet the temperature had dropped, and I could see my breath hanging in the air. The scratching had escalated, echoing in all directions, surrounding me. I realized then the ship's passages were shifting again. Doors and walls were bending, moving, creating spaces that should not exist. The layout was no longer consistent with the blueprints, the maps, or my memory. I backed against the wall, fumbling for my phone, only to find no signal, no connection. Just the faint glow of the flashlight. A shadow moved across the far wall, gliding toward me, faster than any human should be able to. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, and my legs wanted to run, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. A soft mocking chuckle echoed through the metal walls, and I realized the ship was alive, aware, and I was trespassing in its memory. The journal lay open on the desk behind the locked door, pages fluttering, as if alive. And then, I saw her reflection in the small mirror on the wall, Mara, standing behind me, her eyes hollow, whispering. "They take the curious first." I ran. The corridors twisted, the staircases elongated. Every turn led to another hallway, another locked door, another echo of whispers. And above it all, the steady hum of the engines, the only constant, the ship's heartbeat, and mine, synchronized in terror. I realized then that no one on board, not the crew, not the passengers, truly understood what the Ocean Sovereign was. And I was learning the truth too late. It claimed attention, curiosity, life. and in the farthest shadowed corner of the maintenance deck, I heard the tapping return, slow, deliberate, impatient. It was counting toward me. I don't know how long I ran through those twisting corridors, the ship folding around me like a living puzzle. Every turn seemed familiar and wrong at the same time, doors appearing where none had been before, hallways stretching into impossible lengths. My chest burned, lungs screaming for air that seemed thicker than water. The tapping followed, echoing from every wall, ceiling, and floor, a rhythm that I couldn't escape. I forced myself to stop at a junction, pressed against the cold metal wall, and tried to catch my breath. That's when I noticed it. The lights above weren't just flickering, they were dimming in a slow, deliberate pattern, like eyes narrowing in my direction. Shadows pooled unnaturally, stretching across the hall, twisting and writhing in ways impossible under normal physics. Then came the smell, the metallic tang I had noticed since the first night, stronger now, mixed with something fouler, like decaying wood or old blood. My stomach twisted, but my curiosity, or maybe my madness, drove me forward. I needed to find a way out, or at least understand what was happening. I stumbled upon the service hatch I had first noticed, leading down to the spiral staircase into Deck 4's hidden corridors. The door was open, though I was certain I had closed it. A cold draft hissed out, carrying the faint whispers I had begun to associate with the ship itself. I hesitated, then descended. At the bottom, the hallways stretched impossibly long. I could see faint lights up ahead, the glow of another door, the same style as the mysterious cabin I had discovered before. I approached cautiously. The door was ajar, just a crack. I could see inside, the bed perfectly made, the curtains drawn, and the journal on the desk. But there was something new. Footprints, wet and small, leading toward the corner of the room. I held my breath. A soft rustle behind me made me spin around. Empty hallway. Only the faint hum of the engines vibrating through the metal. The tapping had returned, now rapid, erratic, impatient, echoing through the walls as if counting down. My heart slammed against my rib cage. I had to know. I pushed the door open fully. Inside, the room seemed normal, almost mundane, except for the mirror on the far wall. And there she was, Mara, or a version of her. Her eyes hollow, her mouth moving, but no sound came out. I stepped closer, and she tilted her head, the reflection twisting unnaturally, smiling a smile that made my skin crawl. Then the lights went out. Total darkness. My flashlight flickered violently before dying completely. The hum of the engine seemed louder, almost alive, as if the ship itself was breathing around me. And I heard it. Footsteps, but not my own. Slow, deliberate, pacing the corridor outside the cabin. Panic gripped me. I banged on the walls, screamed for anyone, anything. But my voice seemed to be absorbed by the metal around me. The whispers came again, louder now, not just warnings, but commands. Stay, stay, stay. I fumbled in my pockets for my phone. No signal, no light. Only my hands, shaking, feeling the cold metal of the walls. Then the tapping stopped. Silence, heavier than anything I had experienced. I froze, listening, and I realized I was no longer alone in the room. A shadow emerged from the far corner, tall, indistinct, almost fluid. I could feel its gaze on me, pressing into my mind. I stumbled backward, tripping over something soft. A body? My stomach knotted. I scrambled up and turned, only to see the shadow elongate, reaching across the room toward me. The air was ice cold, pressing against my lungs, filling me with a dread I had never known. I ran, through the twisting corridors, down hallways that didn't exist on any map. Doors slammed behind me, cutting off exits I had passed moments ago. Every turn brought more shadows, more whispers, more evidence that the Ocean Sovereign was not merely a ship but a predator, alive and aware. I found myself in the aft lounge. It should have been familiar, a place of safety, but even here the shadows moved unnaturally. I could hear distant cries, muffled, impossible to locate. A maintenance hatch opened above me, and I caught a glimpse of a crew member, lifeless, standing perfectly still, eyes wide and empty. The missing passengers' names echoed in my mind. I realized then that they hadn't vanished randomly. The ship took them. Curiosity, fear, attention, all it needed. And now I was in its sights. I pressed on, desperate for any exit, and stumbled into a corridor I didn't recognize. The walls were slick, pulsating faintly as if breathing. And then I saw it, a cabin number, glowing faintly in the dim red light, 718. My cabin. But it wasn't my cabin. I recognized the balcony doors, the layout, but everything was wrong. The furniture shifted slightly, angles impossible, shadows moving independently. I pushed the door open. Inside, the bed was empty, the balcony doors wide open, rocking slightly with the waves. But in the corner, a small, twisted figure crouched. Not Mara, not me, but something that had once been human. Its eyes reflected the red emergency light, hollow, accusatory, and aware. I backed out. The door slammed behind me on its own. The corridor had shifted again. I could hear the tapping, now everywhere, echoing in my chest, counting, always counting. And in that moment, I understood. The ship didn't just take people. It trapped their attention, their fear, their very being. And the more you tried to escape, the more it wanted you. I ran blindly, the corridors folding in on themselves, shadows stretching, whispers screaming in my ears. Somewhere above, the ocean roared, indifferent. But down here, I was utterly alone, and the ship was patient. I realized, as I rounded yet another impossible corner, that I wasn't going to leave this place as I had entered. The ocean sovereign had claimed me. And worse, I was beginning to understand the price of its claim. I didn't know how long I had been running, or if time even existed down here anymore. The corridors had transformed completely. Steel walls now seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each heartbeat. Every door I passed led to another impossibility. Another cabin that shouldn't exist. Another hallway curling back upon itself. I realized with a sickening clarity, the ocean sovereign had no intention of letting me leave. The tapping had slowed, deliberate now, measured. It was counting toward me. The whispers had grown louder, fragmented, overlapping in a chorus of commands, warnings, and pleas. Stay, forever, listen, follow. My hands were raw from pounding on doors, trying to find a way out, but the ship seemed to anticipate every move. Then I heard a voice, soft but unmistakable. Mara, or what had been Mara. She spoke from somewhere above, down, all around me at once. Ethan, they know you're here. Don't listen. Her tone was panicked, terrified, but carried an eerie calm, like she had accepted her fate. I found myself on a balcony I had never seen before, overlooking the open ocean. The night sky stretched infinitely, stars reflecting on the black water, but the horizon was wrong. Endless, unbroken, no land, no other ships, nothing but water and night. The waves moved unnaturally, curling and folding like the ship itself was stirring them. The balcony door behind me slammed shut. I turned, but the corridor I had been following was gone, replaced by the stark, impossible emptiness of the aft deck. Shadows moved along the railings, long, thin, humanoid shapes that didn't belong. They didn't walk. They glided, floating just above the deck, their forms blurring at the edges. One stopped and turned toward me. I could feel its awareness, the way it observed, measured, waited. The whispering rose to a cacophony, voices from everywhere, nowhere, layering over one another. Curiosity, curiosity, curiosity. I realized then that every step I had taken, every door I had opened, had fed the ship. The ship wasn't just metal and wood, it was awareness, intent, hunger, and it fed on the living. Desperation drove me toward a lifeboat station at the very edge of the deck. The lifeboats hung, suspended, perfectly still, their ropes taut. I grabbed the nearest rope, but it burned my hands. The rope twisted violently, then fell slack. I stumbled back. The shadows were closing in. Then I saw them, the missing passengers. Not dead, not fully alive. Their eyes wide, faces blank, standing along the railings, staring into the ocean. Some raised hands toward me, not in warning but in beckoning. I wanted to scream, to reach them, to pull them away, but my legs refused to obey. My own reflection appeared in the glass of the balcony doors, hollow eyes, pale skin, and behind me, shadows coalescing into forms I could not name. A low rumble vibrated through the ship, stronger than the engines, a pulse that shook the entire deck. The shadows lunged. I ran blindly, diving into a maintenance hatch, sliding down the narrow spiral staircase into darkness. The whispers followed, urgent, panicked, alive. At the bottom, I stumbled into a room filled with mirrors, hundreds of them, all reflecting versions of me that moved independently, each one mouthing the words I could not hear. Stay forever. Join us. I turned to run, but the exit had vanished. The tapping returned, slow, deliberate, counting again, echoing through my chest, and then I saw her, Mara, or the shell of her. She stepped forward from one of the mirrors, eyes empty, a whisper in my mind. It's too late, Ethan. It knows you now. I tried to run, but the floor shifted beneath me. Walls twisted impossibly, folding inward. The mirrors multiplied, reflections of reflections, all converging on me. The whispers became a roar, drowning the hum of the engines, drowning my own thoughts. Somewhere above, I thought I heard a passenger laugh, a familiar announcement, faint and distant. But it didn't belong to the world I was in. This was no longer the ship as it had been. The ocean's sovereign had revealed itself, a predator, a memory, a living, breathing trap. I pressed my palms to a mirror, desperate, and the reflection stared back. My reflection moved first, then the mirror cracked, splitting my image into jagged fragments. Each fragment whispered, pleaded, accused. And then the shadows emerged from the glass, curling around me, pressing, guiding, claiming. The last thing I remember before the cold swallowed me completely was the tapping. 3, slow, a pause, too quick, and then silence. When I awoke, I was back in my cabin. Or a version of it. The bed neatly made, balcony doors open, the ocean calm. I tried to leave. Every corridor led me back here. Mara was gone. The whispers were gone. For now. But the tapping remains in my dreams. The ship remembers. And I know, even as I write this, it is still out there. Waiting, counting, patient. And every curious passenger is just a heartbeat away from being claimed. I don't know if I will ever leave. The ocean sovereign does not release its own. And I wonder, sometimes in the dead of night, if anyone else is listening to this story, whether you will understand the warning. Curiosity is the currency this ship demands. And the horizon. The horizon is endless. Days or maybe hours, I could no longer tell. Passed in the endless cycle of corridors and mirrors. The ship folded around me. Corridors stretching into infinity. Doors leading back to cabins I had already fled. Every attempt to escape brought me back to the same balcony, the same impossibly calm ocean. The hum of the engines pulsed in time with my heartbeat, a steady reminder that the ship was alive, aware, and patient. I wandered through a maze of maintenance halls I had never seen before. Shadows flitted along the walls, just out of the reach of my vision, whispering my name, mocking my panic. I caught glimpses of the missing passengers, some pressed against walls, some peering around corners, faces pale, eyes empty, all frozen mid-movement like statues in a dark gallery. They were trapped too, part of the ship now, their attention feeding it, their fear woven into its memory. A soft creak behind me made me spin. No one. Yet the whispering returned, louder now, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from every surface, every reflection. You belong here, stay with us, forever. My throat burned from screaming, but my voice only echoed back at me, distorted. I came upon another mysterious cabin, one I didn't recognize from before. Its door was slightly open, and light spilled out, warm and inviting against the cold metal of the corridors. Desperation drew me in. Inside, the room was furnished like a luxury suite, everything pristine, almost unreal. And on the bed, a familiar figure crouched, Mara. Alive, or a memory? I couldn't tell. She turned slowly, her eyes hollow, but she whispered my name, soft, urgent. "Ethan, don't look behind you." I froze. The shadows had grown, pooling at the edges of the room, stretching toward me. The whispers intensified, overlapping her words. Join, stay, feed. I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The shadows surged forward, but instead of striking, they receded, pulling toward the balcony doors that now opened onto an ocean that shimmered unnaturally. The waves were impossibly high, reflecting the night sky in endless mirrors. I realized, with a horror that stole my breath, that the horizon was no longer real. The ship had created it, endless and impossible, a prison disguised as freedom. Mara stepped closer, voice trembling. "The ship remembers everything, Ethan. Every passenger, every fear, every step you take. Once it notices you, it doesn't let go." I tried to speak, to ask why, but the words died in my throat. From the shadows, a whisper, deep and resonant, filled the room. Curiosity is payment. Fear is sustenance. Attention is life. The shadows pulsed, moving as one, like water flowing, and the metallic tang I had come to dread filled the air. I ran to the balcony doors, leaping into the endless night. The wind hit me, sharp and cold, carrying whispers and tapping. I fell into the water, only to find myself back on the balcony of cabin 718. The ocean below was calm, indifferent, yet I could hear the faint, measured tapping from beneath the deck. It was counting, always counting. I screamed, pounding on the doors, trying every exit, every corridor, every hatch, every stairway led me back here. Mara was gone, replaced by the faintest echo of her warning in my mind. They take the curious first. I realized the truth then. The ocean sovereign didn't move. It didn't sail. It existed in a loop, a living entity sustained by the curiosity and fear of its passengers. The missing were not lost to the sea. They were part of the ship now, trapped in the endless corridors, shadows stretched thin, waiting for the next heartbeat to claim. And I was the next. I've written this to warn anyone who might board a ship like the Ocean Sovereign. The corridors twist, the mirrors lie, and the ship never forgets. If you're listening to this, take a second to subscribe to Midnight Outcry. It helps keep stories like this alive. But be careful. Curiosity has a cost. And the Ocean Sovereign always collects. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the tapping again. 3, slow, a pause, 2 quick, echoing through the hull. And I know, no matter how far I wander, no matter how long I survive, the horizon is endless, and the ship is patient. And the last thing I hear before sleep, if sleep is even real anymore, is a whisper that chills me deeper than any ocean wind. Your turn. Story 7. Why is no one in this corridor? I whispered to myself as my footsteps echoed off the metal walls. The Ocean Sovereign groaned around me, a low hum vibrating through my chest, the faint stench of salt and engine oil clinging to the air. Something about the silence was wrong, too absolute. I had booked this cruise to escape the suffocating routine of life in Boston. Evan Miller, 32, history teacher, divorced, trying to forget the sudden death of my father. I wasn't the adventurous type, but I needed a week of quiet, of normality. Or so I thought. The first day was unremarkable. The pool deck smelled of sunscreen and chlorine. Laughter drifted across the deck, and the ship's PA broadcasted cheerful announcements. But by evening, something shifted. The corridors no longer made sense. Numbers twisted. Doors appeared where none should be. Cabin 312, my cabin, led me to a small office with a brass nameplate I didn't recognize. Captain Lorigan. Inside, papers were scattered across a desk, some yellowed, others crisp and freshly typed. A logbook lay open, its pages filled with handwriting I didn't recognize, yet on the bottom of one page was a note in crimson ink. Passenger Miller observes too closely. Must be guided. Observation feeds the vessel. My pulse spiked. I hadn't written that. A knock at the door startled me. A crew member, smiling politely, asked if everything was all right. I mentioned the supposedly closed Deck 9. His smile widened. For safety reasons, sir. Best not to wander. And yet, as he walked away, his footsteps dragged unnaturally, metallic and distorted. Back in my cabin, the intercom crackled. The captain's voice announced dinner, the weather, trivial updates. But beneath it, layered whispers repeated my name. Do not trust your eyes. Observe. My phone buzzed with a message I didn't send. You belong here now. I forced myself to sleep, though the cabin felt smaller. Walls subtly moving, shadows pooling in corners. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the office again, my older self hollow-eyed, scribbling endlessly in the captain's log. The whispers grew louder, layered with my own voice. Observation eternal. Do not leave. The next morning, I tried normality. Breakfast, casual conversation, but the lounge betrayed me. Plates frozen mid-air, passengers staring silently, their eyes fixed on me. One raised a glass in a silent toast. I blinked, and the room was empty. Only the faint hum of engines remained. By nightfall, the corridors twisted further. Doors led to new offices, and every reflection showed not me, but someone watching, older, hollow-eyed. I realized the ship didn't just trap bodies. It trapped attention, curiosity, and it had already noticed me. By mid-morning, the Ocean Sovereign felt less like a ship and more like a living labyrinth. Every corridor I walked seemed slightly different from the day before. The numbers on the doors shifted, and corners I'd turned safely now bent impossibly. My footsteps echoed, but sometimes a second echo lagged behind me as though someone, or something, followed at a delay. I decided to check the lounge, hoping for a normal scene. The scent of coffee and toast should have been grounding. Instead, the room was unnervingly still. Steam rose from half-full mugs as though frozen mid-breath. Chairs were tipped over, plates scattered. I stopped, heart racing, realizing I was completely alone, yet the feeling of being watched pressed down from all sides. Then I noticed the passengers. They moved, jerkily, like old film reels skipping. Faces I recognized, families, couples, even people I vaguely knew from past trips, stared directly at me. Their mouths opened and closed silently. I froze, unable to look away. One elderly man lifted a hand in what seemed like a wave, but his eyes never left mine. A woman in a steward's uniform appeared, clipboard clutched tightly. "Sir, the captain requests your presence in the office, immediately." There was no urgency in her voice, only an unnatural certainty that left me no choice. As I followed her, corridors warped. A wall that should have led to Deck 5 twisted into a narrow stairwell. Handrails stretched and shrank as I passed. I reached a window and saw fog curling over the deck. Shapes of passengers emerged from the mist, faces blank, moving as if drawn by invisible strings. Their hands pressed against the glass, and I realized they were inside the fog, waiting. I stumbled into a small office that shouldn't have existed. Papers were scattered, some decades old, some fresh. A logbook lay open with my handwriting, describing events I hadn't experienced. A note in crimson read, "Passenger Miller, observation critical. Do not leave. The ship sees all." The whispers started faint, threading through the hum of the engines. "Observe. Do not leave. Witness." They grew louder, overlapping, indistinguishable from my own thoughts. My curiosity, which had always been my greatest strength, now tethered me to the ship. I tried to record the anomalies on my phone. The files corrupted mid-recording. Glitches filled the screen, multiplying faces in impossible ways. A mirror in the corner reflected not me, but an older version of myself, scribbling endlessly, hollow-eyed. A sudden knock behind me made me spin. Nothing. Only a coat rack swayed as if breathing. The fog seeped under the door, moving with intent. I felt trapped, the ship bending reality around me, reshaping corridors, offices, and lounges to contain my attention. I had a fleeting thought. Maybe if I left, I could escape. I headed for a stairwell I knew well. But when I reached it, the stairs stretched endlessly, metal handrails morphing under my touch. Panic surged as I realized the ship didn't just disorient bodies, it warped perception itself. And somewhere, deep in the mechanical hum, I thought I heard my own voice whispering, "Observation is eternal. You stay." The stairwell shouldn't have stretched like this. Each step seemed to elongate beneath my feet, handrails warm, then cold, as if alive. Shadows flickered just at the edges of my vision, bending in ways no human could. I ran, heart hammering, but the corridor behind me twisted into something unrecognizable. I came to a door, heavy brass with no markings. Inside was a lounge, but frozen in time. A pianist mid-strike, passengers mid-bite, laughter suspended mid-air. All heads turned toward me. Not strangers, faces of friends, family, fleeting acquaintances, staring hollowly. Mouths moved silently, repeating what I had heard in whispers. Observe. Stay. Watch. I tried to back away, but the stairwell behind me had vanished. Only a maintenance corridor remained, walls lined with pipes, crates, humming with life. I ran, tripping over a loose crate. A metallic clang echoed. I froze. In the shadows, a tall, faceless figure extended a hand toward me. The floor tilted underfoot, stretching. A hatch caught my eye. Emergency egress. Authorized personnel only. Desperation pushed me to pry it open. I descended into a dark shaft. Humidity thick, smelling of rust and sea brine. Faint footsteps echoed above, always just behind. But when I looked up, the ceiling dissolved into nothingness. At the bottom, a storage bay formed a labyrinth. Shapes crawled along the racks, humanoid but impossibly twisted, following silently. Each time I tried to turn, the passage seemed to double, corridors overlapping. My rational mind screamed, "Escape is necessary." Finally, a door appeared. Deck 1. Emergency egress. Light spilled from it. Stars glimmered. Waves crashed faintly below. Relief surged. I sprinted, but the floor dropped, stretching beneath me. The lifeboat I'd glimpsed warped into an endless hallway. Stars vanished. The hatch slammed behind me. The truth hit me like ice. The ocean's sovereign didn't kill. It consumed perception, attention, memory. Each observation, each attempt to flee, fed the ship, became part of its architecture. Whispers layered with a mechanical hum. Observation is everything. You are here to witness. I slowed, breath ragged. The corridors stacked atop themselves endlessly. Passengers arrived, laughing and chatting in distant hallways, unaware. A door creaked. A reflection blinked. I wondered, would I ever leave, or was I already part of the ship, forever observing, forever aware, forever unable to act? Every corridor now felt alive, breathing around me. Walls expanded and contracted with each step, lights flickering out of rhythm. I turned a corner and found a dining hall suspended in silence, plates mid-air, passengers frozen mid-laugh, heads turning toward me in perfect unison. My chest tightened. They weren't frozen. They were waiting. I tried to move, but the floor beneath me seemed to pull me forward, corridors elongating endlessly. The whispers grew louder, threaded with my own voice. Observe, do not leave, witness forever. My mind screamed to run, to find an exit, to remember who I was. But the ship was rewriting my perception. A hatch appeared, dimly lit, promising lifeboats, fresh air, freedom. Stars flickered faintly above. I sprinted, heart hammering, reaching for the ladder. Relief surged. Then the floor stretched. The hatch dissolved into a corridor, and the stars vanished. The ship had no exit. Reflections shimmered in polished railings. My own face stared back. Hollow eyes, older, scribbling endlessly in a captain's log I didn't remember writing. Shapes crawled along walls and ceilings, humanoid but twisted, silently mimicking my movements. Panic threatened to swallow me, but my curiosity, the same trait that had led me here, kept me moving. I found the captain's office once more. Papers scattered, the log open to a blank page. My hand moved involuntarily, pen scratching lines I didn't intend. Crimson ink formed words that mirrored the whispers. Observation is eternal. Curiosity feeds the vessel. You stay. I stumbled backward, breath ragged, heart pounding, realizing the ship didn't just trap bodies. It trapped awareness, perception, attention. Each attempt to escape became part of its architecture, folding me deeper into its corridors. Somewhere distant, faint laughter echoed, a reminder of new passengers, unaware, arriving fresh for the same fate. I stepped forward, and the corridors multiplied, stacking endlessly, fog rolling in like a tide. My own whispers joined the chorus, inseparable from the ship. I understood then, escape was an illusion. Every hallway, every door, every shadow was part of the ocean sovereign. I was now an observer, trapped, a vessel of my own curiosity, folded into the ship's memory forever. The lights flickered one last time. Somewhere in the endless halls, a door creaked open. I thought I saw freedom, a sliver of sky, a lifeboat waiting. Then the whispers surrounded me, louder than ever. Observation is eternal. You stay. I moved forward, and the ship exhaled,